The wetlands south of Gainesville used to sound different. Every evening, just after sunset, the marsh would fill with noise, thousands of frogs calling at once, a sound so constant that residents said they could set their clocks by it. Then, in the spring of last year, the sound stopped, not gradually, almost overnight. Wildlife biologist Daniel Reyes had been monitoring these wetlands for 6 years. He knew the rhythm of the marsh better than most. When he returned for a routine survey, he expected the usual chorus. Instead, he found silence. At first, he assumed it was the weather. Maybe a cold front pushed the breeding season back. But as the weeks passed, the frogs never returned. Reyes began walking the wetland edges at night, flashlight in hand, searching for movement. He found something, but it wasn't frogs. Small eyes reflected back at him from the water. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Whatever these creatures were, they were everywhere the frogs used to be. Reyes didn't know it yet, but he had just found the first clue in a mystery that would take state biologists, wildlife officers, and independent researchers over a year to fully understand. Something had moved into Florida's wetlands, and it was spreading fast. The wetland sits inside a quiet stretch of Alachua County, bordered by pine flatwoods and old cattle ranches. For decades, it was known for one thing: frogs, southern leopard frogs, pig frogs, green tree frogs, species that had bred here since before the county had paved roads. Local rancher Wayne Colton grew up near the marsh. He remembers falling asleep to the calls as a boy. It was just part of the land, he said, like the wind. That sound had defined the wetland for generations, so when it disappeared, people noticed immediately. Colton was the first to report it to state wildlife officials. He said it felt wrong, like driving past a house you grew up in and finding it empty. At first, wildlife officers assumed a die-off, maybe a fungal outbreak. Frog populations across the world have collapsed before from disease, but there were no dead frogs, no carcasses along the banks, no sick animals struggling in the shallows. The frogs weren't dying, they were gone. That distinction mattered. A disease leaves evidence. A predator leaves evidence. This left nothing. Reyes returned to the site 3 more times that month, each visit more unsettling than the last. On his 4th trip, he noticed something he had missed before. The marsh grass near the water's edge had been flattened and wide, sweeping trails, like something heavy had been moving through it night after night. He knelt down to examine the pattern. That's when he heard it. A splash, low and heavy, somewhere out past the reeds. Not the light plop of a frog, something bigger. He aimed his flashlight toward the sound. The water had already gone still. Reyes didn't sleep well that night. He kept thinking about the trails in the grass, wide, deliberate, not random. The next morning, he called in backup from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Officer Marcus Blevins had worked invasive species cases before. Pythons in the Everglades, Tegus in Charlotte County. He knew how fast a new species could take hold. But this wetland was different. It was 300 miles north of the usual hotspots. If something's here, Blevins said, it didn't walk this far on its own. The team set motion-triggered cameras along the water's edge. Then they waited. 4 nights later, they had their first images. The photos were dark and grainy, but the shapes were unmistakable. Not one animal, several. long bodies, thick tails dragging through the mud, eyes that caught the infrared light like tiny lanterns. Blevins stared at the screen for a long moment. "That's not native," he said quietly. Reyes felt something twist in his stomach. He had spent years cataloging every species in this marsh. He knew what belonged here. This didn't. Word spread through the small community faster than officials expected. Colton heard about the photos from a neighbor before the state even released a statement. He drove out to the wetland himself, against advice, wanting to see it firsthand. He never got close enough to spot the animals, but he found something else near the tree line. Tracks, fresh ones, dozens of them, all leading in the same direction, away from the marsh, toward the nearby farmland. The tracks worried Blevins more than the photos did. Animals moving toward farmland meant animals moving toward people. Within a week, the state expanded the investigation. A team from the University of Florida's herpetology department joined the search, led by researcher Owen Pratt. Pratt had studied invasive reptiles for over a decade. He'd seen what unchecked populations could do to a wetland. But when he reviewed the camera footage, he paused. "This isn't a small population," he said. "This is established." Established meant one thing. These animals hadn't just arrived. They had been breeding here, quietly, for months, maybe longer. That explained the timeline. That explained why the frogs vanished so fast. Pratt's team set traps along the water's edge, baited and monitored overnight. By morning, 3 traps were empty. Not untouched, empty. The doors had been forced open from the inside. Blevins inspected the damage himself. "Whatever we're dealing with," he said, "it's smart enough to know it's trapped." Then came the call that changed everything. A farmer named Grant Whitfield, whose property bordered the wetland, reported something disturbing. Several of his chickens were missing. Not killed, missing. No blood, no feathers, no fence damage. Whitfield walked Pratt through the coop, visibly shaken. "I've lost animals to foxes before," he said. "This isn't that." Pratt knelt near the coop entrance and found a single clawed print pressed into the dirt. He stared at it for a long time before speaking. "I need to make some calls," he said, because if his suspicion was correct, this wasn't just a wildlife problem anymore. Pratt sent the claw print photo to a colleague specializing in reptile identification. The answer came back within hours. Argentine tegu, a large, intelligent lizard native to South America, known for raiding nests, known for eating amphibians, eggs, and small livestock, known for spreading fast. Once established, Pratt had feared it. Now he had confirmation. But one detail still didn't add up. Tegus were already known in Florida, mostly in the southern counties. This wetland was far outside their expected range. So how did they get here? Blevins began digging through state records, looking for anything unusual. Permit violations, reported escapes, illegal releases. He found something in less than a day. 3 years earlier, a private reptile breeder near Ocala had been cited for inadequate enclosure. The report noted multiple animals unaccounted for after a storm damaged his property. The breeder, a man named Curtis Doyle, no longer operated at that location. Blevins tracked him down at a small trailer outside Marion County. Doyle didn't deny it. "I told them animals got loose," he said. Nobody followed up. Pratt felt something sink in his chest. A breeding population quietly expanding for 3 years, completely unnoticed until the frogs disappeared. That explained the timeline. That explained the trails in the grass. That explained the missing chickens. But it raised a darker question. If the Tigris had reached this wetland undetected for 3 years, how far had they already spread? Pratt looked at the map of surrounding wetlands, dozens of them, all connected by narrow waterways. His stomach tightened. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the one they happened to find first. The survey teams expanded fast after that. Cameras went up in 12 more wetlands across 3 counties. Traps followed within days. The results confirmed Pratt's fear. Tigris were already established in at least 4 connected marsh systems, stretching nearly 20 miles from the original site. Frog populations in every one of them had dropped sharply. Wildlife officials launched an emergency trapping program, working with local landowners like Colton and Whitfield to monitor activity on private property. Progress was slow. Tigris are cautious, intelligent, and skilled at avoiding traps once they learn the pattern. Over the following months, crews removed more than 200 animals from the region. Biologists believe hundreds more remain undetected. Doyle, the breeder responsible for the original escape, was fined and barred from future permits, but the damage was already done. Reyes returned to the original wetland nearly a year after his first strange night there. He didn't expect much, but as the sun dropped low over the marsh, he heard something faint. A single, hesitant call from the reeds, then another. Not a chorus, not yet, but something. A few frogs had returned to a stretch of marsh that had been cleared of Tigris months earlier. A small sign, but a real one. Pratt called it a fragile recovery. Reyes called it something else. Proof that the marsh could still come back if people kept watching. The story of this wetland became a warning for wildlife agencies across the state. A reminder that an invasive species doesn't need to be seen to be dangerous. Sometimes, the clearest sign of trouble is silence. If you want to understand how ecosystems quietly shift before anyone notices, subscribe. There are more stories like this one still unfolding right now.